So what is domination? The textbook definition reads as follows: having supreme power, control, or influence over others, often involving mastery, authority, or ruling power. Domination is displayed culturally in many ways. In movies, just pick your genre. In sports, there are plenty of players and teams that have the natural ability of beating their competition down to a small pulp. Meanwhile, in racing, dominance can be displayed in a multitude of ways. It can be through a driver dominating an entire race or winning the most races in a season, or it can be by a team winning nearly half the races and finishing 1, 2, 3 in the points. When going by team domination, one of the first examples you will find is Roush Racing 2005. This is a season where Jack Roush's 5-car enterprise really could achieve anything.
Wait a minute, did you say anything?
Anything.
Anything?
Yes, anything.
Anything?
Anything.
This is not just another story about domination through record-breaking success on the racetrack. With a solid mix of veterans, drivers in their prime, and future superstars, Roush Racing 2005 is the most electrifying team in NASCAR history. So entering the 2005 season, Roush Racing was hailed as the team to beat. Despite there being two different points formats in the last two seasons, the result remained the same, a Roush Racing driver being crowned champion. Kurt Busch did so by winning the 2004 championship, which was the first in the chase era. 2004 was the year where Busch harnessed his brashness and aggressiveness and used it to his favor. If exercised again, Busch would be able to meet Bush at the White House for the second year in a row. In the preseason, that seemed like a likely outcome. For the most part, the number 97 team was the same from their championship season, except for new engineer Mark Catania. As for the final Latford champion in NASCAR history, Matt Kenseth, his style was a stark contrast from his brash teammates. However, the 2003 champion was able to achieve a similar amount of success as a model of consistency. Paired again with Robbie Reiser, Matt Kenseth seemed poised to win his second championship in 3 years, especially considering that Matt Kenseth, as a young driver, for the most part had gained the respect of his peers. Still, Matt Kenseth was far from being the most admired driver at Roush Racing. That award goes to NASCAR's greatest protagonist of all time, Mark Martin.
And Mark Martin wins. And the guys on pit road were incredible. They're number one in my heart, I tell you.
Mark Martin has never won the 600 at Charlotte. He has now.
I told them they can win that race. They can have most of my part of that money, a big part of it.
Mark Martin was the most revered driver in the NASCAR Cup Series. His teammates, fellow competitors, and fans adored his driving style as well as his humble personality. Mark decided to repay the favor by announcing his Salute to You tour. This would be a 38-week tour honoring the fans that backed him throughout his near 3-decade full-time career. This was Mark's last dance, or at least it was supposed to be. For his supposed last shot at a championship, he would have Pat Tryson as crew chief. Pat Tryson's positive attitude sent shockwaves within the entire number 6 team, and it was most felt by the driver himself. So after helping Mark Martin regain his competitive form in 2004, Tryson was well positioned to give his driver the greatest send-off in NASCAR history. This was amplified even more considering that Martin and Tryson would be working with Mike Yano, who was the lead engineer for Kurt Busch in 2004. Mark Martin's presence could be felt amongst the young drivers in the Roush system, which included third-year Cup driver Greg Biffle. Greg Biffle was considered a driver that adapted quickly, whether it was winning the Truck Championship, Busch Championship, or winning a Cup race in his rookie season. Still, Greg Biffle allegedly felt that Roush was holding him back. The inconsistencies of the 16 teams stirred up the silly season rumor mill that Biffle was looking elsewhere. Without question, the third season of Greg Biffle's Cup Series career needed to be exceptional. So the only change regarding Roush Racing's 5-car team was with the number 99. Due to sponsorship problems, Jeff Burton would depart the team to drive for the Richard Childress Racing number 31 car. Taking his place would be Ken Schrader's nephew, Carl Edwards. This was a driver that always made the most of new opportunities. In 2 seasons in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series with Roush, Carl Edwards won 6 races. Even with that success, many in the NASCAR industry were still skeptical if Carl Edwards was seasoned enough as a driver to go Cup racing. Prior to 2005, Carl Edwards had made just 15 combined Cup and Busch Series starts. But even from that incredibly small sample size, Jack Roush had seen enough and decided to grant Carl Edwards his first full-time season in the Cup Series. So there was no doubt that Roush Racing's 2005 roster was compelling. What you had with this team was a solid mix of veterans, consistent and aggressive young champions, plus drivers that were projected to become future superstars. With that much talent, there was a lot of optimism within the walls of Roush Racing prior to the season. When asked about the team's expectations for 2005, you could tell that Jack Roush was shooting for the stars.
Right now we're at an all-time high. I expect Mark to win. I expect Matt to win. I expect Kurt to win more. And I'd be surprised if Carl Edwards, as a rookie, doesn't win at least 3 times this year.
The energy was high, and now it was time to take that and display it on the racetrack. In the season opening Daytona 500, the Roush Ford Tauruses were looking to win Jack Roush his first Harley J. Earl trophy. Kurt Busch was tantalizingly close as he made a last lap charge, but it wasn't enough. Jack Roush watched in agony as Jeff Gordon won his third Daytona 500. This was truly a Daytona 500 where Roush went through the ringer, whether it was the devastating loss, whether it was the fans inside Mark Martin's car shutting off over and over, or whether it was the early departure of Matt Kenseth. Kenseth's engine failure in this race ended his streak of 71 consecutive races where Matt ranked inside the top 10 in points. So the first race of the season not being excellent meant one of 2 things. Number 1, I seriously just clickbaited you guys, or number 2, Roush would end up stepping up in week 2 of the season. The latter would be true, as in the 2005 Auto Club 500, it was evident that the team to beat was Roush Racing. Every single driver in the Roush Racing stable had a driver rating over 100. Roush's Fabulous 5 combined to lead 151 of the 250 laps, with 4 drivers finishing inside the top 7. That would have been 5 of the top 8 had Matt Kenseth, the most dominant driver of the day, not had a right front tire issue with 16 to go. As for the race win, Greg Biffle would win his 4th race of his NASCAR Cup Series career on the back of some great strategy. For Las Vegas, it would be the ultimate battle of Goliaths, the Roush Fords against the Hendrick Chevrolets. While the 16 and the 97 contended for the win, they were no match on that scoreboard for the 48. Race 4 in Atlanta offered Roush redemption and to stop Jimmy Johnson's intermediate dominance. Roush would exceed in that objective thanks to an unlikely hero.
Johnson tries to block him. It's who can stay in the throttle here off turn 1. And here they come, and I think Carl's got the advantage on him. He won it.
Carl Edwards would stun not only Jimmy Johnson but the entire NASCAR industry. In just his 17th Cup Series start, he would get his first career win. 4 of the top 5 drivers in the point standings were Roush Racing affiliated. While the Roush team was riding the waves of success, they would unfortunately get tamed at Martinsville by Hendrick Motorsports. Hopefully, their struggles here don't seriously cost them a championship in November. Considering that Roush at Intermediates is a completely different beast than Roush at Martinsville, they would roar back to life in Texas. Originally, it seemed like the leading driver at Roush Racing in this race wouldn't be Greg Biffle. The 16 team had a stressful weekend, especially when they wrecked their primary car in practice. Their best piece was sitting in the garage, tarped up, but you wouldn't think that after watching this race. I'll let the video clip do the talking about just how good Greg Biffle's car was in dirty air. After starting the race in the back, on lap 87, Greg Biffle had overtaken Tony Stewart for the lead. Once he got the clean air, Biffle would go on to have one of the greatest races of his season. Greg Biffle dominated by leading 219 laps, but this race wouldn't be decided by dominance, but rather strategy. The pressure was high, but this was nothing new for Doug Richert. Richert was molded by the 1980 season when he was tapped mid-season to replace Jake Elder as Dale Earnhardt's crew chief amidst the Osterlund team leading the points. Considering the youth and inexperience of Richert, many in the industry predicted a second-half collapse. Instead, the youthful number 2 team rose to the occasion to win the 1980 championship. Now, a quarter century later, Doug Richert showed that same pressure immunity in this Texas race. Richert made the call to put his driver on the offensive to power past the Ganassi Dodges. Greg Biffle had his second win of the season, and this was a victory that didn't just pay out a trophy and a ton of money considering that this is Texas. This was a character-building race for the 16 program and a massive confidence boost going into the rest of the season. The Roush supremacy would continue in Phoenix as the defending champion flexed his muscles on his 42 competitors. Judging by his perfect driver rating of 150, Kurt Busch was truly unbeatable in this race. They would carry this into NASCAR's second crown jewel race of 2005 as team number 16 continued their evolution. On the final restart of the race, Greg Biffle drove the wheels off of his Ford Taurus, manhandling Ryan Newman to become a Southern 500 champion, which to this day is the biggest win of his NASCAR career. This victory didn't just prompt an extension at Roush, cemented Greg Biffle as the cornerstone of the organization, and all but silenced the preseason critics. The entire NASCAR industry now knew who they needed to beat in order to win the 2005 title. In the first 10 races of the 2005 Cup season, Roush won half of the races, and 3 of those 5 were won by Greg Biffle. While the Roush banner was being carried by its young stars like Biffle, Edwards, and Busch, their elder statesman was making the headlines as well. In the 2005 All-Star race, Mark Martin decided to turn back the clock to 1993. Martin would win the $1 million prize and become, still to this day, the oldest driver to win the NASCAR All-Star race. Considering that this was Mark Martin's quote-unquote final season, it was an extremely popular victory. Unfortunately, racing can be cruel, brutal, unforgiving. That's what Mark Martin would experience the next week in the Coca-Cola 600. Mark Martin would DNF out of the race and break his 33-race streak without a DNF. Mark Martin officially entered the dog days of summer chasing after a bone, that bone being the first points-paying win of his 2005 season. So after Hendrick Motorsports dominated the Coca-Cola 600, Roush Racing was looking to rebound. Dover would swing the pendulum back into Jack Roush's favor. Biffle would dominate the last 160 laps of the race to win the 4th race of his breakout season. As for NASCAR's first trip to Pocono in this 2005 season, it was a tricky one. Due to the package changes, NASCAR would outlaw shifting in this race. As for Carl Edwards, he was also facing adversity. Due to the Nashville Busch race getting rained out and being run at the same time as the Pocono Cup race, Carl Edwards would be forced to withdraw from that race, and he would do so as the season points leader, a huge hit to his championship hopes. Fortunately, cousin Carl would get a nice consolation prize. The first-year sensation would score his second win of the year. This was a historic win, not just because this was Roush's first win at Pocono. By starting 29th, Carl Edwards to this day still holds the record for the furthest starting position by a Pocono winner. So for Michigan, Roush always takes pride in performing well in Ford's backyard. The 2005 Batman Begins 400 continued the team's superhero-esque abilities. In this race, Roush placed 4 drivers inside the top 5, with Greg Biffle winning his 5th race of the season. This style of dominance by the Roush Fabulous 5 should have been the telltale sign that 2005 was going to be the summer of Roush. Instead, Tony Stewart would become an absolute beast. In the summer of 2005, Tony Stewart didn't just have a stretch of 8 races where he led the most laps in 6 of them. Tony Stewart was damn near unbeatable in mid-June to July with a stretch of 5 wins in 7 races. The only Roush win in that summer sample size was Kurt Busch's 3rd win of the season at Pocono, which was historic in its own right. Roush Racing swept the Pocono Mountains clean in 2005. The team as a whole combined to have the fastest lap for 119 of the 203 laps, which is a whopping 58.6% of the race. Plus, Kurt Busch would achieve his 2nd perfect driver rating of the season. Tony Stewart might have been the driver to beat, but certainly the Roush Racing team was the organization to beat. You had Greg Biffle in his breakout season. You had Kurt Busch achieving perfect driver ratings. You had first-year sensation Carl Edwards. Plus, you had Mark Martin as the dependable veteran still competitive at 46. Okay, but what about Matt Kenseth, the supposed model of consistency? Well, in the first half of 2005, Matt Kenseth was anything but consistent. Due to bad luck, Matt Kenseth had dug himself a deep hole. Therefore, it was a miracle that he was even in the chase conversation by the time August rolled around. For the most part, it was a night and day difference between Matt Kenseth's performance in the first half of the regular season versus the second half. Kenseth had some strong races to put himself back in that conversation. Now he just needed a handful of elite performances to join his 4 teammates in the chase. The 2005 Bristol night race would end up being the turning point of Matt Kenseth's season. In one of the most impeccable drives of his entire career, he would lead 415 out of the race's 500 laps. As of 2025, this ties him with Dale Earnhardt for the 2nd most dominant victory in the Bristol night race. Then at Auto Club, Matt Kenseth finished 7th and led 14 laps, one of which was lap 24. That solidified that all 5 Roush cars had led at least 1 lap before Kyle Busch became the first non-Roush driver to lead a lap on lap 82. Oh yeah, it's also important to mention that Roush Racing swept the first 4 spots in qualifying. With another top 10 at Richmond, history had been defied and Matt Kenseth completed his comeback. Matt Kenseth's second half drive wasn't the only historic thing on that night. In the race, Kurt Busch won, Matt Kenseth finished 2nd, and Greg Biffle finished 3rd. With this result, Roush officially had their first ever podium sweep. In fact, this was the first 1-2-3 finish for one organization since Hendrick Motorsports achieved this feat in the 1997 Daytona 500. Roush Racing ended their regular season much like how they performed for a majority of it. Absolutely elite. Roush Racing led the entire series with 11 points-paying wins plus the All-Star race. They would also shock the NASCAR industry by placing all 5 of their drivers in the 10-race chase. That's right, Roush's chances at the 2005 championship was a coin toss. They had a 50-50 chase playoff ratio that has never been matched by any other team. Roush Racing was truly incredible in 2005, and now any of their fabulous 5 could win the championship and solidify the Roush Racing dynasty of the mid-2000s. while Roush having 5 of the 10 chase cars was a massive flex, often quality is better than quantity. One by one, the Roush cars would be toppled. Kurt Busch would crash in New Hampshire, then try to save his season at Dover with a dominant performance. However, an untimely yellow would unravel everything as Kurt Busch finished 23rd. As for the caution that hurt Kurt Busch's championship hopes, well, it was his teammate Matt Kenseth blowing a tire. Just like that, the hottest team in the second half was back to being ice cold. Then in the wildcard race of the chase, Talladega, Mark Martin would get jumped on lap 21. Throw in some mediocre finishes by Carl Edwards, and only Greg Biffle found himself in the top 5 in points. Considering that Tony Stewart was heating up again by leading the most laps in 2 of the first 3 chase races, Roush absolutely needed an elite performance in race 4. Fortunately, this race would be at an intermediate track, and the Roush drivers in the Kansas race led all but 79 laps. So while Roush dominating this race wasn't a surprise, perhaps it was a little shocking to see who was leading all of these laps. Most of the laps were led by Mark Martin, who redeemed himself after having a terrible recent trend of leading the most laps in a race but not closing the race out. Mark Martin winning this race ended that agonizing 5-race streak. Like most Mark Martin wins, this one was extremely popular, but it was also one that etched Roush into NASCAR history. Due to Mark Martin winning his first points-paying race of the year, Roush became the first and currently only team in the modern era to have 5 different drivers win a race in a single season. Even more remarkable, Roush drivers in this race finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th. Following race 5 at Charlotte, Roush's game plan for the rest of the chase was simple. Greg Biffle was their best chance to win the title, although if Mark Martin and/or Carl Edwards had a string of solid runs, they could have another horse in this race. So when everyone at the Roush Racing shop looked at the schedule for the chase, they knew that their biggest challenge was going to be Martinsville. Despite their efforts to get better, Roush in this race folded like a pillow pet. Greg Biffle and Carl Edwards, completely irrelevant all day. But for Edwards and Biffle in this race, they were brutally reminded that things could always be fucking worse. Teammate Mark Martin would have an abysmal day, suffering brake issues late in the race to where he couldn't even stop the car properly. Martin was forced to go behind the wall, forfeit points, and in all likelihood his championship hopes for 2005. After 500 laps, all 3 Roush drivers still in contention for the championship finished 20th or worse. So with Tony Stewart and Jimmy Johnson finishing 2nd and 3rd respectively, Roush needed to roar back to life. They would do so at Atlanta, where Carl Edwards became the first driver since Bill Elliott in 1992 to sweep Atlanta, Georgia clean. Then the next week in the inaugural Furco 500, Roush's intermediate dominance continued. Carl Edwards won back-to-back races and most importantly the 4th win of his first full-time season. Those 4 oval wins tops a lot of the greatest rookies in NASCAR Cup Series history like Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, and Denny Hamlin. Oh yeah, not to mention that Roush would sweep the podium for the 3rd time in 9 races. Despite Jack Roush winning a shit ton of money, I'm pretty convinced that he bought into the narrative that money can't buy happiness after this race. Greg Biffle's race snowballed into something that was uncommon for the 16 team in intermediates. All because of one vibration, the 16 lost all of their track position, and unlike in the spring, they struggled in the dirty air, causing Greg Biffle to spin out multiple times and finish 20th. The 16 team knew that their backs were against the wall, and they would come back fighting in Phoenix. Greg Biffle would take to the track and have one of the greatest drives of his 2005 season by leading 189 laps. Unfortunately, Kurt Busch's younger brother wanted it more. Kyle Busch would pass the dominant car of the day with 28 laps to go and never looked back. This was a devastating loss for Greg Biffle, not just considering that this was his 3rd best race of 2005, which was even better than a majority of his wins. As for Carl Edwards, he finished 6th, which is a good day, but unfortunately in this instance, Carl Edwards needed a great one. Tony Stewart's strong run solidified that the Roush Racing team needed a legacy race in order to win the 2005 Cup. Although the organization couldn't ask for a better track. Statistically, Homestead, Miami for Roush was the equivalent of being the home team for Game 7. Roush had won 2 of the last 3 races at this track, as well as being strong at intermediates all season long. So as the sun set on Roush's elite 2005, they would end with their best performance ever. The race itself would end with a photo finish between Greg Biffle and Mark Martin. Biffle would take this battle and win his 6th race of his breakout 2005 season. As for Mark Martin, he would race his guts out but come up short. This finish looks awfully familiar to how he lost the 2007 Daytona 500. You know, somebody at some point should make a full-length video on all of Mark Martin's Daytona 500 heartbreaks. Matt Kenseth would finish 3rd, and then you had Carl Edwards, the most dominant car of this race. The 2005 Ford 400 would continue Carl Edwards' hot streak, as the 3 best races of his season were all in the final 4 races. His first year in the NASCAR Cup Series would end with a strong 4th place finish. Okay, so going over the running order, you've got Greg Biffle 1st, Mark Martin 2nd, Matt Kenseth 3rd, and Carl Edwards 4th. Yes, that actually happened. Roush Racing achieved the first 1, 2, 3, 4 finish in NASCAR history. This is a threshold of excellence that, as of 2025, has only been achieved legally one other time at the NASCAR Cup Series level. Roush Racing in this race would also score their 4th podium sweep, which again was remarkable. In the entire history of the NASCAR Cup Series, a podium sweep by a team has only happened 14 times. 4 of those were achieved by Roush Racing in a stretch of 11 races. Talk about insane. As for the end of the chase, Roush Fenway Racing in terms of laps led didn't just have the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th highest chase drivers with that threshold. Carl Edwards led the most laps in this race. That solidified that in the 10 chase races, all 5 of the Roush drivers had at least one race where they led the most laps. Those laps led would translate to wins, as the Roush Racing team in the 2005 chase won 4 of the 10 races. Still, despite all of this greatness and winning the final battle, Roush Racing would lose the damn war. Despite placing 5 drivers in the chase, earning 4 podium finishes, and winning 15 races, a Roush driver wouldn't be able to have the title as 2005 champion. Instead, it would be Tony Stewart and Joe Gibbs Racing, forever remembered as the 2005 NASCAR Cup Series champions. While Roush Racing failed to solidify their dynasty, every driver in their stable had an elite season. It begins with Greg Biffle, as this was the year where he became a legitimate Cup driver. Biffle won a season-high 6 races, won the Southern 500, and finished 2nd in points. Plus, Greg Biffle was really damn good at the intermediates. For Greg Biffle, the only painful moment of his season was Texas. Had Biffle finished 7th in that race, which was more than plausible considering how many fastest laps he ranked up in that race, he would have edged out Tony Stewart for the title. For Carl Edwards, he had one of the greatest first full-time seasons in NASCAR history. Carl Edwards had many memorable moments, and the statistics back that up. Edwards also performed when lights were brightest, scoring the most top 10s of any chase driver and tying Jimmy Johnson in the chase for the most wins. Looking at Edwards' career as a whole, his 4 wins would be the 2nd most in his entire Cup Series career, 2nd to only 2008. For Mark Martin, he had another consistent year and had 2 winning moments. Sure, maybe he didn't win the championship, but still at age 46, he was as competitive as ever. For Matt Kenseth, he completed an incredible comeback to qualify for the chase and clinch a 7th place points finish, clinching his 4th consecutive top 10 points finish. In this season, Kenseth would also lead 1,000 laps, just the 3rd time in his entire career in which he would do so. Finally, there's Kurt Busch. This was a puzzling season because you had the bad things like his fallout at Roush in the final 2 races. Not to mention, Kurt Busch was not consistent as he had the 2nd highest crash rate in the entire Cup Series. Still, Kurt Busch performed like prime Kurt Busch. He was 10th in the points and he was a top 10 driver in every single statistic outside of races at the finish. As it would play out, 2005 would also be the most laps led in Kurt Busch's entire Cup Series career. Throw in the 2 perfect ratings and this was a damn good season from Kurt Busch, even though everything fell apart in the end. So as you can see, all 5 of the Roush drivers had an equal amount of success and were championship contenders until the end. This is the biggest thing that separates Roush 2005 from other super teams like Hendrick 2021, where one driver basically achieved 70% of the success. So after this 2005 season, the future was bright for Roush Racing and its drivers, or so we thought. Despite each driver taking different and promising career paths, there was one consistency. Biffle, Edwards, Martin, Kenseth, and Kurt Busch combined to win 0 championships for the rest of their careers. This fate became reality mostly thanks to this guy. As for Roush Racing, over the next few years, the team would become less dominant and a lot more archaic in their ways. There was even a time when it looked like Roush was gonna die off before Brad Keselowski said nay. Now in 2025, RFK Racing is in NASCAR's middle class. They're a team that's competitive but far from winning another championship due to OEM rules. And honestly, that's a fate that I wouldn't mind, especially as a Jeff Gordon fan that is still traumatized from 2014. With that said, I have a huge amount of respect for what Roush Racing was able to achieve in 2005. This team broke record after record after record and certainly raised the bar for what a multi-car operation could achieve. But look, Roush Racing's 2005 is more than just being dominant. Roush 2005 is the most electrifying super team in NASCAR history. You had Greg Biffle with a breakout season. You had Carl Edwards as one of the most fun drivers to watch. You had Mark Martin, who was just as competitive as ever at 46 years old. You had Matt Kenseth complete one of the biggest comebacks in NASCAR history. Plus you had Kurt Busch performing like prime Kurt Busch. That is why Roush Racing 2005 will forever have a special place in the NASCAR memory books.